The noise hit first. A high, piercing shriek that bypassed my ears and went straight for the base of my skull. It wasn't a sound you hear, it was a sound you feel, a physical violation. For a second, lost in the murk between dreaming and waking, I thought it was part of some nightmare. Then Chloe was shaking my shoulder, her voice tight. "Leo, Leo, get up!" My eyes cracked open. The red light of the smoke detector was flashing a frantic, rhythmic pulse against the ceiling, bathing our minimalist bedroom in a hellish strobe. And the sound? Holy Christ, the sound! It was the building's main fire alarm. It was 2 in the morning, of course. "Pants," I mumbled, my brain struggling to catch up. "Pixel." "I've got him," Chloe said. She was already pulling on a sweatshirt over her pajamas, the cat a squirming, unhappy lump in her arms. We stumbled out of the bedroom and into the living room. The alarm was even louder out here, a solid wall of noise that made it impossible to think. We fumbled with our keys, my hands feeling thick and clumsy. The lock finally turned and we spilled out into the hallway, joining a small, confused herd of our neighbors. People were in bathrobes, mismatched socks, boxers. A woman from 3A was clutching a half-empty bottle of wine like a life raft. Everyone had the same dazed, irritated look on their face. The air in the hallway was cool and clean. There was no smell of smoke, nothing, just that god-awful screaming from the ceiling speakers. My eyes scanned the crowd, a jumble of sleepy, annoyed faces. And that's when I saw him. He was at the far end of the hall, near the emergency exit, standing just outside the main pool of light. He wasn't like the rest of us. We were all huddled together, looking around, asking questions no one could hear over the racket. He was just standing there, perfectly still. He was a tall guy, I think, dressed in dark clothes. He wasn't looking at the flashing lights or the other residents. He was looking right at us, right at Chloe. It wasn't a casual glance. It was a stare. Focused, intent. There was no panic in his posture, no irritation. He was just watching. I felt a weird chill crawl up my spine, a feeling completely separate from the cold of the hallway floor. It felt wrong. I blinked, trying to clear the sleep from my eyes, and nudged Chloe. "Hey, do you see that guy?" She turned, following my gaze, but the alarm suddenly cut out. The silence that followed was deafening, almost as shocking as the noise had been. In that abrupt quiet, everyone flinched. And when my eyes adjusted, the end of the hallway was empty. He was gone. "What guy?" Chloe asked, stroking Pixel's head to calm him down. The cat was still grumbling. "Nothing," I said, shaking my head. "Probably just tired, seeing things." But the image of him standing there, a shadow with a purpose, wouldn't leave my mind. A few minutes later, the building manager, a flustered man named Mr. Henderson, came jogging down the hall. "False alarm, folks. Sorry about that. Some kind of system malfunction. We're looking into it. Everyone can go back inside." A collective groan of relief and annoyance went through the hallway. People started shuffling back towards their doors, muttering about the time. We did the same. As I put the key in our lock, door 2A, I felt it snag on something. I stopped. "What's wrong?" Chloe asked from behind me. "I don't know." I ran my finger along the door, right next to the keyhole. There was a scratch. It wasn't wide, but it was thin and deep, a silvery line against the dark gray paint. The metal underneath was gleaming. It looked like someone had tried to jam a screwdriver or something similar into the gap between the door and the frame, right where the deadbolt was, and failed. "Was that there before?" Chloe whispered, her voice low. My own mind was racing. The man in the hall? The scratch? The timing? No, it couldn't be. "The movers," I said, maybe a little too quickly. It must have been the movers. We probably just didn't notice it until now with the light hitting it this way. I was trying to convince myself as much as her. It was a logical explanation, the most logical one. We'd only been here a week. Scuffs and scratches are normal. She didn't look convinced, but she nodded. The exhaustion was setting in for both of us. We went inside, double-checked the locks, and crawled back into bed. But I didn't sleep. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the normal sounds of the building settle back down, and trying to push the image of the man at the end of the hall out of my head. The next afternoon, the incident felt like a bad dream. A new day, sunshine streaming through the large windows of our living room, the coffee machine gurgling. I was working from home, debugging some code, and Chloe was sketching at the dining table. It felt normal, safe. Then the buzzer rang. "Expecting something?" I called out. "Nope," she said, getting up. She spoke into the intercom, and a moment later, the muffled voice of the delivery guy announced he had a package for apartment 2A and would leave it with the concierge. A little while later, she came back upstairs carrying a small, shoebox-sized package wrapped in plain brown paper. There was no return address. The shipping label just had our address and Chloe T printed on it. "Late housewarming gift, maybe?" she said, tearing at the paper. Inside was a wooden box. It was old, antique-looking, made of a dark cherry wood with intricate brass fittings. On the lid was a faded, inlaid mother-of-pearl design of a ballerina. Chloe gasped. "Oh my God," she whispered, her fingers tracing the design. "Leo, look." I walked over. "What is it?" "It's a music box," she said, her eyes wide with a strange mix of delight and confusion. "When I was a kid, I used to see one just like this in an antique shop my mom and I would pass. I wanted it so badly. I told her it was my dream music box." She looked up at me. "How on earth?" "Maybe your mom sent it?" I offered. "No, she'd have called, and she doesn't even remember that story." She shook her head, a small, puzzled smile on her face. "Who would even know about this?" She unlatched the small brass clasp on the front. "I think the only person I ever really told about this specific box was Mark." The name hung in the air for a second. Mark, her ex from years ago, the one she didn't like talking about. The one who, according to her, got a little intense toward the end. "No way," I said. "He wouldn't. And how would he even have our address?" "I don't know," she said, her smile fading. She seemed to hesitate for a moment, then opened the lid. We both leaned in, expecting the delicate, tinny plink-plonk of a classic music box. The little ballerina inside didn't even twitch. Instead, a different sound came out. It wasn't music. It was a low hiss, the sound of static, like an old radio between stations. A faint, electronic hum sat underneath it. Chloe's face fell. "Oh," she said, disappointed, "it's broken." I leaned closer, frowning. As a software guy, I spend my life deciphering signals from noise. And there was something in this noise, something rhythmic. I put my ear right next to the small grill inside the velvet-lined box. "Wait," I said, holding up a hand. "Listen." We both fell silent, our heads practically touching as we bent over the box. The apartment was quiet except for the gurgle of the fish tank and the hum of my PC.
Over the hiss from the box, I could make it out. It was faint, but it was unmistakable. A deep, slow, regular sound. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. It was the sound of someone breathing. A man, by the sound of it. Calm, steady breathing. And underneath that, another sound. A pattern. Click, clack, clack. Click, clack. My blood ran cold. I knew that sound. I hear it 8 hours a day. It was the sound of fingers on a keyboard. We stayed frozen like that for what felt like a minute, just listening. Listening to a recording of some unknown person breathing and typing coming from a vintage music box that somehow knew a secret from Chloe's childhood. A gift from no one, sent to our new home. Chloe slammed the lid shut. The sound cut off abruptly. She stared at the box as if it were a venomous snake. "What the hell?" she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. I tried to find a logical path, a technical explanation. It's a broken recorder. Someone probably recorded over the old music mechanism with a cheap mic. It picked up background noise, that's all. But the words sounded hollow even to me. They didn't explain the box itself. They didn't explain how it got here. They didn't explain whose breath we were just listening to. Chloe wrapped her arms around herself. I looked around our beautiful, sunlit apartment.
The art on the walls, the sleek furniture, my glowing gaming rig in the corner. For the first time since we moved in, it didn't feel like a sanctuary. It felt exposed. I had the distinct and powerful feeling that we were being watched. And the sound, the slow, steady breathing, and the quiet clicking seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the room. It felt like it had never stopped. The music box sat on the coffee table like a small wooden tomb. Chloe had refused to touch it again after slamming the lid shut, and I didn't blame her. We'd moved it from the dining table as if proximity alone was a threat. Now, in the flat gray light of a Seattle morning, it just looked pathetic. A piece of antique junk. But we both knew what was coiled inside it. That recorded sound. The breathing. I tried to work. That was my solution for everything. When things get weird, retreat into the clean, absolute logic of code. Ones and zeros don't have ulterior motives. But I couldn't focus. My gaze kept drifting from my dual monitors to the small camera perched on the bookshelf across the room. We'd bought it to keep an eye on Pixel when we were out. A ridiculous little Wisecam, cheap and cheerful. Now it felt like a vulnerability. I pulled up the live feed on my second monitor. Pixel was curled up in a patch of sunlight on the rug, a perfect orange comma. I watched him twitch his ears, watched the slow rise and fall of his side. Normal. Everything was normal. I took a deep breath and forced myself to debug a particularly nasty block of Python script. Maybe 20 minutes passed. I was deep in it, the kind of focus that makes the world fade away, when a flicker on my second monitor caught my eye. I looked over. The feed from the Wisecam was gone. In its place was a screen of digital snow, a chaotic mess of black and white pixels hissing silently. My first thought was, of course, technical. Connection dropped. It happened all the time. Our building, despite being new, had some weird Wi-Fi dead spots. I waited for the blue light on the camera itself to blink, for it to try and re-establish connection. It stayed solid. Odd. A few seconds later, the screen flickered again.
The snow vanished, and the image of our living room snapped back into place. But something was off. My stomach tightened. The angle. It was a fraction of a degree different. Before, the edge of the television was just in frame. Now it was out. The camera now seemed to be pointed slightly more towards the hallway, towards our bedroom door. It was such a small thing, so small you could convince yourself you'd imagined it, that it was always like that. But I knew it wasn't. "Bullshit," I muttered, pushing my chair back. It had to be a software glitch, a reboot that reset the camera's digital pan settings. It had to be. Then the internet slowed to a crawl. Pages wouldn't load. My connection to my work server timed out. It was like trying to breathe through a wet cloth. Frustration, hot and familiar, washed over the unease. This, at least, was a problem I could solve. This was my domain. I logged in to our router's admin panel. The interface was sluggish, but it loaded. I went straight to the system logs, the raw, unfiltered text that tells the real story of a network. And there it was, my breath caught in my throat. Page after page of failed login attempts. Brute force attacks, hammering away at our network's door. Hundreds of them, all in the last hour. My eyes scanned for the source. I was expecting some random IP address from halfway across the world. What I found was worse. Much worse. The source IP for every single attempt was 192.168.1.114, an internal address. The connection requests weren't coming from the internet. They were coming from inside the building's local network, from one of our neighbors. A cold certainty clicked into place. The man in the hallway, the music box, the camera. It wasn't a string of coincidences. It was a sequence. For a moment, I was just angry. A pure, clean anger that burned away the fear. Someone was trying to get into my home, my network, my territory. All right then. Game on. I spent the next hour fortifying our digital walls. I didn't just change the Wi-Fi password to something monstrously long and complex. I changed the router's admin login. I disabled remote access entirely. I enabled MAC address filtering, creating an exclusive guest list for the network.
Only our devices, my PC, our laptops, our phones would be allowed to connect. Anything else would be met with a silent, invisible wall. I even set up alerts to my phone that would trigger if any unauthorized device so much as tried to shake the handle. When I was done, I leaned back in my chair, a grim sense of satisfaction settling over me. I felt the knot in my shoulders ease for the first time all day. I had built a fortress. He could knock, but he wasn't getting in. "Hey," I called out to Chloe, who was nervously sketching at the table, pretending everything was fine. "I think I figured out the slow internet. Someone nearby was trying to piggyback on our Wi-Fi. It's all fixed now. Locked it down tight. They can't get in." She looked up, her eyes wide and searching. You think it was?" "I think it was some script kiddie in the building who wants free internet," I lied. It was a small, necessary lie to see the relief wash over her face. "It's fine. It's handled." I felt a little surge of pride. I had protected her. I had used my skills, my knowledge, to make our space safe again. The feeling lasted for almost 2 hours. Then, Chloe's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it. Her face went pale. "Leo." Her voice was a cracked whisper. I went to her side. She was staring at her email inbox. A new message. The sender was just a jumble of random letters and numbers. There was no subject line. And it had one attachment, a single file named lastnight.mp3. We both stared at it. My carefully constructed digital fortress suddenly felt like it was made of sand. He hadn't needed to break down the door. He'd just mailed the poison straight through the letterbox. "Don't," she said, her hand reaching out as if to physically stop me. "Don't open it. It's just spam, a phishing attempt," I said, but the words were hollow. My own confidence from earlier felt ridiculous now, arrogant. Still, some part of me needed to know. I had to face it. I reached over, my hand trembling slightly, and tapped the download icon. Then I tapped play. Silence. For a second, I thought the file was blank. Then, hissing static filled the speaker of her phone. The same static from the music box. My heart hammered against my ribs. And beneath the hiss, a voice. My voice. It's a broken recorder. Someone probably recorded over the old music mechanism with a cheap mic. It picked up background noise, that's all. The sound was perfect, crystal clear, not distant or muffled. It was as if the microphone had been sitting on the table right between us. Then came Chloe's voice, fragile and thin. What the hell was that? We stood frozen in our own kitchen, listening to a ghost of ourselves from the night before, listening to our own hushed, frightened whispers. Every pause, every shaky breath, every rustle of clothing was captured perfectly. The conversation continued, a perfect, verbatim transcript of our fear. We heard ourselves deciding to move the box, heard the scrape of its wooden feet against the dining table. We heard me trying to reassure her. The hollow confidence in my recorded voice made my skin crawl. The recording was about 2 minutes long. As it neared the end, the sound of our voices faded, replaced by the quiet ambiance of our apartment. The hum of the PC, the gentle burble of the fish tank, and then nothing. The file ended. Silence descended on the room once more. But this silence was different. It was heavy, suffocating. It was filled with the unsaid truth. All my passwords, my firewalls, my MAC address filters, they were a child's game, a joke. He hadn't hacked our Wi-Fi to listen to us. He didn't need to. He had another way. I looked at Chloe. The color had completely drained from her face. She was looking around the living room not as if it were her home, but as if it were a cage filled with unseen eyes. The illusion of safety, the one I had just so proudly rebuilt for her, was shattered into a million pieces. He wasn't trying to get in. He was already in. I slowly stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. My technical mind, my problem-solving brain, was spinning, discarding possibilities. It wasn't the phones. I would have found the spyware. It wasn't the laptops. It wasn't a device on our network. It had to be physical. It had to be a bug. A microphone, hidden somewhere. My eyes darted around the room, desperately scanning for anything out of place. I strode over to the smoke detector on the ceiling, staring up at the small plastic grill. Nothing. I looked at the smart speaker on the kitchen counter, but we'd unplugged it weeks ago. I checked the power outlets, the baseboards, the back of the television. Nothing. 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 My desperate search grew wider, more frantic. I ran my hands along the edges of Chloe's paintings, behind the bookshelf, under the sofa cushions. I felt like a madman, tearing apart my own home. And I found absolutely nothing. I finally stopped in the middle of the living room, breathing heavily. My gaze drifted upwards to the smooth, white, unbroken plaster of the ceiling. Our upstairs neighbor. We'd never even met them. We just heard the occasional footstep. I felt a dread so profound it was almost physical, a cold weight settling deep in my gut. The question wasn't if he was listening anymore. We had the proof right there on Chloe's phone. The only question left, the one that screamed in the sudden, terrible quiet of our home, was how? From where? I slept in my office chair that night. I told Chloe it was because I wanted to monitor the network, a final line of digital defense. That was a lie. The real reason was that I couldn't stand the thought of lying in bed, in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and wondering what was happening on the other side of it. In my chair, with the glow of 3 monitors bathing the room, I could pretend I was in control, pretend I was awake. I drifted in and out of a shallow, useless sleep, my screensaver a swirling galaxy of stars that offered no comfort at all. Morning came, gray and final. The sky was the color of concrete. I felt 100 years old. My back ached, my eyes were gritty, and a dull, metallic taste coated my tongue. But routine is a powerful sedative. I had to go to work. We had to pretend to be normal people with normal lives. Bills still needed to be paid. Code still needed to be written. "I'm heading out," I called to Chloe. She was in the kitchen, making coffee with slow, deliberate movements, like she was afraid a sudden motion would break something. She just nodded, her eyes fixed on the dark liquid filling her mug. She didn't look at me. The air in the building's underground parking garage was cool and damp, thick with the smell of exhaust fumes and curing concrete. My footsteps echoed, too loud in the quiet. My car, a sensible blue sedan, was parked in its designated spot. It looked wrong. I stopped a few feet away. At first, my sleep-addled brain couldn't process it. The car was listing to one side, squatting low to the ground, too low. A cold feeling, sharp and unpleasant, pricked the back of my neck. All 4 tires were flat. Not just low on air, they were completely, utterly deflated. The rubber sagging around the rims in sad, wrinkled folds. My first thought was a raw, immediate spike of anger. Some kid, some asshole with too much time on his hands. I walked closer, my fists clenching, and knelt down to inspect the front passenger side tire. It wasn't a slow leak. A long, deep gash, about 3 inches long, had been sliced into the sidewall. It was a viciously clean cut. I ran my finger near the edge of it. This wasn't a nail or a piece of glass. This was a knife. A box cutter, maybe. I stood up and checked the others. Same thing. Each tire had been deliberately, methodically destroyed. This wasn't random vandalism. This was an execution. That's when I saw it. The morning condensation had left a thin, hazy film on the windshield, and traced through that film, written with the tip of a finger, were words. The letters were big, almost childishly so, but the message they formed was anything but. She looks prettier when she's scared. The air left my lungs in a single silent rush. The anger vanished, replaced by a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature of the garage. It was a cold that started in my stomach and spread outwards, turning my limbs to lead. He hadn't just been listening, he had been watching. Watching her face when she played that audio file. Watching the fear bloom in her eyes. The thought was so violating, it made me want to be sick right there on the concrete floor. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers numb and clumsy. I had to call Chloe. I had to tell her to lock the door, the deadbolt, the chain, everything. My thumb jabbed at her contact picture. It rang twice.
Leo? Her voice was small.
Chloe, listen to me, I said, my voice coming out harsh, strained. Go to the front door right now. Lock it. Lock the deadbolt and put the chain on. Do it right now and don't open it for anyone. Do you understand? What? Why? What's wrong? Just do it, please. I'll explain when I get back upstairs. I heard the phone clatter on a countertop, then the sound of her footsteps, quick and light. A moment later, the solid, reassuring thunk of the deadbolt sliding home, followed by the metallic rattle of the security chain. Only then did I let myself breathe. "It's done," she said, her voice tight with alarm. "Leo, you're scaring me." "Someone cut my tires," I said, looking at the words on my windshield. I couldn't bring myself to tell her what they said, not over the phone. "They're all flat. I'm coming back up." Calling the police felt like a formality, a pointless ritual. 2 officers showed up about an hour later. They were young. One looked bored, the other just seemed tired. They ambled down to the garage with me, their utility belts creaking with every step. "Yep, they're flat all right," the bored one said, nudging a tire with the toe of his boot. "They were cut," I said, pointing to the gash. And there was a message written on the windshield. The condensation had long since evaporated, taking the words with it. The proof was gone. "A message?" the tired one asked, pulling out a notepad. He wasn't looking at me, but at the notepad, his pen hovering. I told him what it said. I watched his face for any reaction, shock, concern, anything. There was nothing. He just wrote it down, his expression unchanging. "Have you had any recent disputes?" he asked, the standard question. "Problems with neighbors? A recent breakup? Someone at work?" "No," I said, the word tasting like ash. "We just moved in. We don't know anyone. Except—" I trailed off, thinking of the man in the hallway during the fire alarm, a faceless shape in the dark. It sounded insane. "No, no one." "Right," the officer said, clicking his pen. "Well, we'll file a report for the vandalism. There are no cameras down here, so honestly, there's not much we can do. Our advice? Get a dash cam and maybe try to park in a more visible spot." He handed me a slip of paper with a case number on it. It felt like a receipt for a transaction that had never happened. They were gone a few minutes later, leaving me standing beside my crippled car, holding a useless piece of paper. We were on our own. The rest of the day was a fog of anxious waiting. We didn't leave the apartment. Every creak in the hallway, every footstep from the apartment above, sent a fresh jolt through my system. We kept the chain on the door. Chloe tried to sketch, but kept tearing out the pages. I sat at my computer, not working, just staring at the Wisecam feed of our living room, as if I could catch him in the act. Pixel was a small comfort, a warm, purring presence that occasionally wound his way around our ankles. Around 5 in the evening, Chloe stood up. "Pixel," she called out. "Kitty, kitty." Silence. "That's weird," she murmured. "He always comes for dinner." She called his name again, louder this time. Still nothing. A new, specific kind of dread began to crawl up my spine. It was different from the fear of the unseen watcher. This was more immediate, more visceral. "He's probably just hiding," I said, my own words sounding hollow. We started to search. We looked under the bed, our voices tight with forced cheerfulness. We checked behind the sofa, in the closets, behind the shower curtain. Nothing. We searched the entire apartment, a space that suddenly felt vast and full of empty corners. With each passing minute, the silence where his meow should have been grew louder. "The door's been locked all day," Chloe said, her voice trembling. She was standing in the middle of the living room, her arms wrapped around herself. "The windows are closed. How could he?"
She didn't need to finish the sentence. He couldn't have gotten out. It was a systematic violation. Our network, our conversations, our car, and now this. He wasn't just watching us anymore. He was taking things from us, a piece at a time. Chloe sank onto the sofa and finally let out a choked sob. I went and sat beside her, but there were no words. There was nothing I could do to fix this. My firewalls and passwords were a joke. My deadbolt was a toy.
He could reach right through the walls and take whatever or whoever he wanted. Later that night, the kitchen garbage was full. Taking it out was the last thing I wanted to do, but it was something to do. A task. A small piece of the normal world I could cling to. I tied the bag, the plastic rustling loudly in the quiet apartment. "I'll be right back," I told Chloe. She just nodded, her eyes red-rimmed and distant. I slid the chain off, unlocked the 3 locks on our door, and stepped into the hallway. It was empty. The lights cast long, distorted shadows. I walked the 20 feet to the rubbish chute room at the end of the hall. It was a small, tiled closet that always smelled faintly sour. Inside was a large wheeled industrial bin for recyclables and a metal door for general waste. I lifted the heavy plastic lid of the recycling bin to toss in an Amazon box. And I froze. My hand was still in the air. Time seemed to slow down. My eyes were fixed on the top of the pile inside the bin, sitting neatly on a crushed milk carton and some old newspapers. It was Pixel's collar. His little blue collar, with the tiny silver bell attached. It was placed there perfectly, deliberately. Not thrown in, but set down. And right beside it, also carefully placed as if for a photograph, was a dead mouse. Its fur was gray and matted. Its head was twisted at an unnatural angle. The neck was broken. I just stood there, staring. The sour smell of the room seemed to crawl into my throat. This wasn't a threat anymore. This was a statement, a trophy. It was a message written in a language of pure, calculated cruelty. I can get into your home. I can touch the things you love. I can hurt them. I can kill them. And I can leave you a souvenir. My breathing was shallow. A sound escaped my throat, something between a gasp and a sob. I slowly, mechanically, reached into the bin. My fingers closed around the collar. It felt small and fragile. The tiny bell gave a muffled, pathetic little jingle. I imagined for a second I could still feel the warmth of his fur on it, but it was just cold plastic and fabric. I stood up straight, the collar clutched in my fist. I looked down the long, empty hallway, back toward my own front door, which suddenly looked like no protection at all. Then my gaze drifted upwards, to the smooth white plaster of the ceiling, to the floor of apartment 4B. He wasn't just listening from up there. He wasn't just watching. He was playing with us. And this was just the beginning of the game. I walked back into the apartment and closed the door. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home felt pointless, a child's ritual against the dark. Chloe was standing where I'd left her, in the middle of the living room, a statue carved from fear. She looked at my empty hands, then at my face.
Her expression was a question she was too afraid to ask. I didn't say anything. I just opened my hand. The small blue collar sat in my palm. The tiny silver bell was silent. A sound came out of her, a thin, wounded noise that didn't sound human. She didn't scream or cry. She just folded. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the floor, her body curling into a tight ball, as if to protect itself from a blow that had already landed. I stood there, the collar clutched in my fist, watching the woman I loved break apart on our living room floor. And I could do nothing. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Time had stopped making sense. Eventually, I helped her to the sofa. I sat beside her in the dark, the only light coming from the swirling galaxy on my monitor's screensaver. We didn't talk. There were no words for this. He had taken our cat. He had killed him and left us a trophy. The message was clear. We weren't living here anymore. We were just waiting. The first thing to go was the fridge. Its low, constant hum, a sound so much a part of the background I'd stopped noticing it, just ceased. The silence it left behind was huge. Then the lights on my PC rig flickered and died. My monitors went black, plunging the room into near-total darkness. The only light was the dim, cold glow of the city filtering through the window blinds. "Leo?" Chloe's voice was a whisper next to me. "Power outage," I said. But the words felt like a lie even as I said them. I reached for my phone on the coffee table. The screen lit up my face. In the top left corner, where the signal bars should be, were 2 words: "No service." My blood went cold.
I looked at Chloe. She was holding her phone, her face pale in its light. She shook her head. Nothing. We were cut off. A tiny, isolated island in a concrete sea. The building was silent around us. Too silent. No televisions from other apartments, no distant music. It was as if the whole building had been put to sleep, all except for us and him. Then we heard it. It came from the front door, a faint metallic scratching. It wasn't the clumsy fumbling of a pick or a credit card. It was precise, measured. The sound of a key sliding into a lock, our lock, a key we didn't know existed. I froze, listening. Every muscle in my body pulled tight. Chloe's hand found mine in the dark, her grip like a vice. The scratching stopped. A pause. I held my breath, praying it was a mistake, someone on the wrong floor, the wrong door. Click. The sound was clean, sharp, and final. The sound of the deadbolt retracting. It was the sound of our last defense falling. The sound of the end. The door began to move. It opened inwards, slowly, without a sound. A long, thin rectangle of pale light from the hallway cut across our floor, bisecting the room. And a figure stepped into it, blocking the light. It was him, the man from the fire alarm, Mark. He looked exactly the same, but seeing him here, in our space, changed everything. His face was a placid mask, showing nothing. No anger, no excitement. Just a flat, empty calm that was more terrifying than any rage. In his right hand, he held a pair of bolt cutters. They hung by his side, heavy and dull. He wasn't here to threaten. He was here to finish something.
My brain, which had shut down in sheer terror, suddenly rebooted. One single overriding command roared through me, drowning out everything else. Protect Chloe. Action replaced thought. I shoved her hard towards the back of the apartment. The bedroom! Go! Lock the door, now! For a second, she just stared, paralyzed. Then the command registered. She scrambled to her feet and ran, a frantic shadow disappearing into the darker shadows of the hallway. Mark took a step inside, turning his head slightly, tracking her movement. He hadn't counted on me. I was just the quiet computer guy, the obstacle. My eyes darted around the entryway. To the left of the door, mounted on the wall, a small red fire extinguisher. Mark pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, a harsh white cone that swept across the room. He was looking for Chloe. I took my chance. While the light was pointed away, I lunged, my fingers fumbling with the extinguisher's bracket. It came free, heavy and solid in my hands. He heard the sound, and the light snapped towards me. I didn't hesitate. I didn't aim. I just squeezed the handle. A thick, white cloud of chemical powder erupted from the nozzle. It hit him square in the face. He let out a choked, furious scream, dropping his phone. It clattered to the floor, the flashlight beam now pointing crazily at the ceiling. He clawed at his eyes, gasping and coughing. I didn't press the attack. He was bigger than me, stronger. A straight fight was suicide. I had one goal: buy time. I ran past him, back to the open front door, not to escape, to trap him. I slammed the heavy door shut and, with a shaking hand, shot the deadbolt home. I fumbled for the security chain and slid it into its track. For good measure, I turned the final lock on the doorknob. I had locked him in, with me. The thought was insane, but Chloe was in the bedroom. She needed more time. The coughing behind me stopped. I turned. Mark was a silhouette against the window, wiping the white powder from his sleeve. He had retrieved the bolt cutters. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes. An ugly, possessive fury. "You should not have done that," he said, his voice a low rasp. He came at me. I backed away, deeper into the living room, my heart hammering against my ribs. I grabbed a heavy glass vase from a side table and threw it. It sailed past his head and smashed against the wall. He didn't even flinch. He lunged. I sidestepped and he stumbled past. I grabbed my work laptop from the coffee table, holding it like a shield. He swung the bolt cutters. Not the cutting end, the heavy metal handle. It hit the laptop with a sickening crunch of plastic and metal. The force of the blow traveled up my arms, shocking my bones.
From the back of the apartment, I heard a loud thud, then another. Chloe, she was doing something in the bedroom. Mark heard it too. He glanced toward the sound, his face twisting. She can't run. He came at me again. I retreated, kicking an ottoman into his path. He stumbled over it, giving me a precious second. I scrambled into my office nook. My textbooks were on the shelf, heavy, hardcover volumes on programming languages. I grabbed one and swung it like a club, connecting with his shoulder. He grunted, more annoyed than hurt, and swiped at me with his free hand, catching my cheek. My head snapped back, and a flash of white exploded behind my eyes. I fell back against the wall, my ears ringing. Then came a new sound, an explosive, crystalline crash. Glass, from the bedroom. Mark froze. He knew what it was. We both did. She'd broken the window. A wave of desperate, frantic hope surged through me.
She was getting out. Mark let out a roar of pure frustration and turned his back on me, heading for the hallway that led to the bedroom. This was my last chance. I surged off the wall, ignoring the screaming pain in my ribs, and tackled him from behind. I wrapped my arms around his legs. It was like tackling a statue. He was immovable. He back-kicked, his heels slamming into my stomach, and the air rushed out of my lungs. I crumpled to the floor, gasping. He didn't waste another second on me. He ran down the hall. I heard him hit the bedroom door with his shoulder. The wood shuddered. Then again. A crack echoed through the apartment. Then, faintly at first, another sound, a siren. It was distant, a thin wail from a world away. But it was there. It was real. Mark heard it too. He stopped trying to break down the door. I heard his footsteps, fast now, coming back to the front room. He was trying to escape. He wrenched at the doorknob, forgetting the chain. The door rattled violently in its frame. He threw his shoulder against it, but the chain held. He cursed, a low, guttural sound, and started looking wildly around the room, like a cornered animal searching for another way out. The sirens were louder now, much louder. 2 tones, then 3. They were close. I crawled to the front door, my body screaming in protest, and pushed my back against it, adding my meager weight to the locks. He saw me. He started towards me, the bolt cutters raised, but the sound of tires screeching to a halt directly outside the building made him freeze again. It was over. The flashing red and blue lights strobed through the blinds, painting the room in slices of frantic color. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. "Police! Open up!" a voice boomed from the hallway. Mark dropped the bolt cutters. They hit the floor with a heavy clang. He put his hands on his head, just as the door burst inward, the chain ripping from the wood frame, and 2 officers swarmed in, guns drawn. It all became a blur. Shouting, the click of handcuffs. Me, slumped against the wall, trying to breathe. Paramedics, a scratchy blanket over my shoulders. A cop asking me questions I couldn't seem to process. All I could think about was the sound of breaking glass. I found out later, on the lawn outside, that she had made it. Chloe had thrown a desk chair through the bedroom window and jumped. We were only on the 2nd floor. She'd landed on the soft grass, sprained her ankle badly, but she was alive. She had dragged herself to our neighbor's door and hammered on it until they opened. Hours passed. The sun came up. After they had taken my statement for the 3rd time, a detective, an older man with tired eyes, approached me. "We need you to come with us, son," he said, his voice gentle. He took me back into the building, but not to my floor. We went up, to the 4th floor. He stopped in front of apartment 4B and pushed the door open. It was Mark's apartment. It looked normal. A sofa, a TV, a kitchen with dirty dishes in the sink. But the detective led me to a back bedroom that had been converted into an office. And that's where the normality ended. The room was a web of wires. Multiple monitors were mounted on the wall. A server rack hummed quietly in the corner. It was a surveillance station. The detective pointed to the floor. At first I didn't see anything. Then he knelt down and shone his flashlight. There, drilled through the hard wood and the concrete subfloor, was a hole no bigger than a pinprick.
"He had fiber optic cameras and mics," the detective said, his voice flat. "Right through his floor, into your ceiling, in your living room, your hallway, your bedroom. He was living right above you, watching every move you made. The floor tilted beneath my feet. I had to put a hand on the wall to steady myself. All those nights I had stared at the ceiling, feeling watched. I had been. But that wasn't the worst of it. On the main monitor was a file manager window. The detective pointed to an external hard drive icon labeled Projects. He clicked on it. A list of folders appeared. The first one was named Chloe. "He's got terabytes of data," the detective said quietly. "Video, audio logs, keystroke captures from your Wi-Fi, copies of her old emails. A complete digital life." He used his finger to trace down the list of other folders. My breath caught in my throat. There were 5 other names: Jennifer, Ashley, Megan, Kim, and Sarah. "He wasn't just stalking her," I whispered. The detective shook his head. He clicked open the folder named Chloe. Inside were hundreds of files. He pointed to one document near the bottom. It was named Phase 3 Reunion.Plan. My skin crawled. Then he went back. He navigated to the folder named Sarah. It was structured the same way, full of pictures, videos, personal data, and the same plan file, Phase 3 Reunion.Plan. But next to this one, there was another file, a simple text file. It contained a single word: completed. "Sarah Jensen," the detective said, his voice barely audible. "Reported missing 2 years ago. We never found her." He was looking at me, but I wasn't looking at him. I was staring at the screen, at the names, at the plans, at that one solitary word. We hadn't been the targets of a deranged ex-boyfriend. We had just been the next name on a list. We were a project, and tonight was supposed to be the night we were completed.